thank you, Qiao, for joining me on the show today. Really appreciate you taking the time, and it's great to have you on. I've seen you tweeting a lot about crypto in the past, and more recently, a lot about longevity, which was what really made me start paying attention. Those are two of my greatest interests, and longevity is one you don't see people talking about quite as often. So it was refreshing to see that. You started at Masari, and we're helping with the founding team there. I think focused on product. Prior to that, you did 10 years as a quantitative trader, I believe, and then more recently, you've been working on DeFi Alliance, which is an interesting sort of accelerator for DeFi projects. But for those who don't know you, would love to sort of get into the gritty details of sort of how you got your start from as early as you're willing to go to where you are today.
Sure. Well, number one, thanks, Jake, for having me. Really appreciate it. I guess maybe taking a chronological order of things. I graduated from Waterloo, University of Waterloo, where also Vitalik went to, and I'm 4 years older. Never, our paths never really crossed each other. But I studied math at Waterloo. Well, interestingly, before Waterloo, I got into the best pre-med school in Montreal, or two of the best pre-med schools there. So I've always been, I guess, interested slash curious about biology, biochem, that kind of stuff, which later led to my current kind of obsession about longevity, health in general. But anyway, so after Waterloo, after graduation, I did quant trading. The thing about quant trading is it's not your like typical Wall Street kind of trading, like the kind of traditional kind of traders. It's really nerdy. It's really like sits at the intersection of finance and technology, and it's data science driven, software driven, hardware driven, even that kind of stuff. So the reason why that I mentioned that is because something like Bitcoin, which also sits at the intersection of crypto or finance and technology, is something that naturally drew my attention in the very early days due to, I guess, my previous background and experience. So, I got into Bitcoin, I guess, pretty early. The day I learned about Bitcoin was maybe sometime in 2011, 2012, when I saw on the Bloomberg terminal that some asset dropped like 80% within a week or something like that, which is quite unusual by traditional finance standard. So I was like, what kind of asset does this, right? So I started learning about Bitcoin. I thought it was interesting. It was novel enough that I said to myself, if this thing succeeds, it's probably going to do me a 100x or 1000x. But more likely than not, it's probably going to fail. But the expected value of making a bet is still way positive. So took a chance on Bitcoin, obviously later. Ethereum as well in 2014, primarily thanks to the fact that Vitalik also went to Waterloo. Just wanted to support somebody who went to the same school. Got lucky there as well. And then, 2017, a bunch of things happened. Obviously, there was a lot of scams and ICOs, but 2017 was really the moment I realized this Ethereum thing or crypto in general was going somewhere. And so I started working full time. I left my, trade, extremely lucrative trading kind of profession and got into crypto full time. As part of the founding team at Masari, I started building, or I ran the product there, built out the technical team. Obviously, as very early stage, as part of the very early stage startup, you get involved with a bunch of other things as well, like operations, biz dev, research, et cetera, et cetera. So did a little bit of everything. And when I left about last year, which is maybe 2 years after I started, Masari was doing really well. We were we're pretty much cash flow positive. We were like about 30 people. And I just wanted to start something from scratch again. Um, and coincidentally, that was when DeFi started, or DeFi really started to take off. I mean, obviously, DeFi started well before, maybe 2018 with MakerDAO and that kind of stuff. But 2020 with the compound liquidity mining, that was really when this whole thing started. So we started the DeFi Alliance, myself being based in Chicago, we saw a lot of interest from some of the largest trading firms in the world, like Jump Trading, DRW, like all these guys. They were looking into DeFi. And in fact, they've been in crypto since as early as 2013, 2014. So these guys have always been well ahead of the curve. And they got into DeFi before everyone else as well. That was before the DeFi summer. They were interested in learning about DeFi. And then we also saw a bunch of DeFi projects looking for institutional liquidity. That was, again, about a year ago. So we saw an opportunity to bridge the gap between these two worlds. And that's how we started the DeFi Alliance, which runs an accelerator program for DeFi startups where they get mentorship from some of the largest market makers. And these are not just crypto native market makers and trading firms. These are some of the largest traditional trading firms. They get support from those guys, as well as some crypto native investors who can help with product design, token economics, some of the best lawyers in this space. We're very close to regulators in Washington and around the world. So yeah, that's sort of what we do at the DeFi Alliance, and that's where I am today.
That's a great story, and I appreciate you sharing it. I want to DeFi Alliance that sounds super interesting. I want to start by rewinding a little bit to back when you were trading and you first discovered Bitcoin. It's interesting because a lot of people, they first discovered Bitcoin from either seeing the price directly or a friend or something. But in almost every case, it was during one of the periods where it's up a lot. It's funny that it got your attention on an 80% drop, but then you sort of still had that curiosity to dig in, and you got interested a little bit, and sort of that just planted the seed that grew from there. Can you talk a little bit about how, like in the early days, because 2012, very early, most people weren't, first of all, weren't aware of it, and then even people who were interested in it, I don't think many of them sort of could imagine the sort of magnitude that it would grow to become, even just today, let alone in the future that people now envision it growing into. So I'd be curious about like sort of your first impressions, and then from an investing standpoint, you mentioned how of course it had a high probability of probably totally failing and going to zero, but there was some chance that it would go up 100x or 1000x. I'm curious how you think about those sort of opportunities in terms of allocating some portion of your money. Like, is it something where you just put a small amount of money, or you're actually willing to bet fairly large on these opportunities with extremely high upsides, even with smaller probabilities?
Mm-hmm. I guess in hindsight, back I would say like back in 2012, I didn't really quite understand Bitcoin. To be very honest, I spent quite a bit of time on Bitcoin Talk, which is like the very first forum where all these libertarians and technologists hung out and talk about Bitcoin and how it might one day become this digital gold thing and change the entire world, especially when it comes to central banking, all that stuff. I just said to myself, okay, these guys look pretty interesting, and they seem to be really ambitious. Generally speaking, it's not a bad idea to bet alongside people like that. So that's number one. And number two is when you see a technology like that seems fundamentally novel and interesting, but you don't know if it'll work. I think the most important thing to do there is to not overthink. You see a lot of like, especially macroeconomists nowadays who are still bearish on crypto, especially Bitcoin. And I think they just overthink this kind of stuff. Like they try to convince themselves in the world with a bunch of theoretical reasons why this might not work. Of course, it might not work, but if it does work, then the upside is huge. And I think um, it, you don't want let ego and you don't want let ego to really affect your decision making when it comes to stuff like this, when it comes to like investing in highly asymmetric investment opportunities. You don't want to overthink it. I think that the best thing to do is if you see something really novel and fundamentally interesting, just take a bet, but take a small bet. Don't bet your entire savings into something like that. But obviously, the risk reward, the risk profile nowadays is a lot different than when it was in 2012. Um, Obviously, the risk is a lot lower. The entire industry has been de-risked um, because there is this sort of reflexivity in crypto, especially in Bitcoin. The more institutional money there is in this asset, the more bullish you can actually be on it, because it's sort of like digital gold, where the value really comes from people's perception and this inner subjective belief in this asset. So the risk profile is different, so you can probably bet a little bit more these days. I personally have way more than the average person should be taking, the kind of risk that the average person should be taking. But I would say like it's not unreasonable to put like frankly 5, 10, 20% um, of your savings into this asset class, especially the blue chips, the top assets by market cap, like Bitcoin, Ethereum. Especially if you're young, it's not a bad idea. But if you go back 9 years, all the way back to like 2012, putting your entire net worth into an asset like that is probably too risky. So maybe back in the day, I guess back in the day myself, I probably put, I don't know, maybe like 10, 20, 30. I don't know what it was, but I was really young and I said to myself, okay, if this thing fails, I can still work. I still have a pretty good career in trading, right? I
Mhm.
can still make it all back. So it depends on a lot of factors. Depends on your time horizon, your age, your whether or not you have like people that you have to take care of in your family, your job, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. People a lot of times will sort of ask for like sort of blanket investment advice. And my perspective has been always that like, well, maybe not always, but more recently, the more I've thought about it, I realized like investing is very much a personal thing where, if you're 60 and are looking to retire in the next few years, you'll have like a way different sort of set of priorities to invest according to than if you're, like you said, early on in your career, willing to take a high risk, high reward situation when the reward can potentially be just incredibly meaningful, and sort of set you maybe even for the rest of your life. And the downside is just, well, okay, I worked 2 years for all that money and now I've lost a good amount of it, but I can just keep working. I'm in my 20s or whatever it is. So I think that's a really good point. And, you mentioned being like over allocated to crypto versus what you might like recommend to someone. But I think what's interesting is that um, people like yourself and even myself, we're sort of betting more than just our money on crypto, right? Like we've invested a significant amount of our time and sort of careers to, well, really just time to crypto and to working and learning within the space. And so, from my view, it's like if you're gonna spend the time, you might as well invest the money, or if you're gonna invest the time, you might as well invest the money. The first is actually more valuable in my perspective, and so you might as well sort of align them. So I think that's at least how I think about it. And speaking of the time sort of comparison, I'm curious if you sort of can make an analogy between crypto and longevity. I know there's a lot of parallels, but one in
Yeah.
particular that I think is interesting is this concept of like this, 100 or 1,000x upside with maybe in the beginning a seemingly small probability of actually coming to fruition. That was crypto in 2012. That's also, I think, longevity now, where you're not trying to cure a specific type of cancer or a specific type of this disease or that disease. You're going for the full boat of trying to slow or reverse aging, which has this huge upside, this huge sort of benefit if you succeed. And you can maybe put a relatively small amount of money towards making that a possibility and betting on that occurring. How do you think about sort of that probability weighted, high potential approach between like crypto and longevity?
Yeah, I just had so many thoughts that crossed my mind during the last 30 seconds. Let's see where to start. Well, number one, I think the EV of betting on longevity is not just positive, it's potentially infinite because there is a non-zero chance. I didn't say this, obviously, like it's something that Aubrey de Grey have said before, the possibility of escaping the longevity or the longevity escape velocity, right?
Mm-hmm.
The idea that as the technology improves, you might be able to repair all the damages that you've accumulated, and there's a possibility that technology progresses faster than the damages that accumulate in your body that cause you to age. So this idea of longevity escape velocity, if it does happen, the EV is infinite. It's not positive. It's really infinite, right? The idea, the easiest way, assuming that's true, the easiest way to become the richest person in the world is to outlive everybody else and really leverage the eighth wonder in the world, which is the compounding, right? The compounding of investments. So that's number one. Number two, to your point, it does seem to me that, obviously age is probably, actually, like most people don't realize this, but age is the most important risk factor for virtually every chronic disease, which is insane. Like everything that you can think of, like every like neurodegenerative disease or hypertension, cancer, like all these other things, they are closely related or closely associated with age. And yet somehow, since the beginning of modern medicine, we've never really focused on this particular risk factor. We try to focus on everything else. We try to treat diseases individually. We try to develop a drug for every single disease. And yet, if we're able to solve at least partially the problem with aging, it might be possible to help with a ton of diseases at the same time, right? So that's one of the reasons why I find longevity is such a fascinating industry as well as an investment opportunity. Speaking to your earlier point about the similarity between longevity and crypto, I think there's a lot of similarities. I think where longevity is today really reminds me of the early days of Bitcoin back in 2012, 2013, where the average person either doesn't care or thinks is a total joke. But there is a group of very talented and ambitious people who are really leading the charge in the space and building. I think a lot, and to that point, a lot of people in crypto are actually very passionate about longevity, but they don't publicly talk about it because it's still such a controversial topic among the general public. But behind the scenes, I know there's a ton of people who are interested. Every time I tweet about longevity, I would get a couple of DMs from people who are in crypto. And just, and that's usually the beginning of a very interesting intellectual discussion. So that's one similarity between longevity and the early days of crypto. And the other one I noticed, again, I'm not sure, like I'm not an expert, but based on my conversation with the experts in this domain, it seems like the final boss for longevity, or I shouldn't say the final boss, but one of the biggest challenges is regulators. The fact that the vast majority of governments around the world, or the vast majority of public sectors, don't really focus on this idea of anti-aging, or have regulations that are potentially impediments to the development of age-related drugs. And that is certainly true in crypto. In crypto, regulations is, for me, it's the final boss, in a sense that where we're going from today to 10 years from now will largely depend on how regulations will pan out. To me, there are two biggest challenges in crypto. One is the tech, and the other one is regulations. The tech is actually challenging, but it's a solvable problem. But the regulations is something that I'm not really sure how things will pan out. It's a societal effort, and it's going to be extremely challenging. It's unlike tech, which is just a matter of time. Regulations, there's so much uncertainty. So this is the other like kind of similarity between the two. Yeah, hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think it opens the door to a few more. I think one interesting point that you brought up was how uh basically how aging is at like, it's above sort of all these other diseases like Alzheimer's and heart disease and cancer. And one of the more interesting stats that I've heard is basically, I actually first heard this from Vitalik in preparing for an interview with him, and it's basically that I might, don't quote me on this, but the numbers are approximately right. It was like if we were to cure cancer totally, the average, human lifespan rather, in this case, I think would expand, like 3 to 5 years or something like that. Same thing with heart disease, and the reason being that, if you cure one of these things, it's just like, okay, like the other one gets you. Like if you don't get cancer, you'll get heart disease or vice versa. And then there's like Alzheimer's and these other sort of most popular reasons for death. And I'm sure there's others sort of waiting behind them if and when we were to cure all of them. But if you actually cure aging, or rather not even cure aging, but something much more reasonable sounding, which is like slow aging by 10% or 20%, then you're adding like, okay, 8 years or 16 years. And suddenly like the concept of living until like well past 120, which I think like the oldest person in the history like recorded was like in their 120s, maybe 122 or something like that. It doesn't sound that unreasonable, and it doesn't even sound that unreasonable to sort of occur in our lifetime once you start looking at like the animal studies and things like this. So it's super exciting, and I think sort of to that point, the fact that I had heard that stat from Vitalik, who's been pretty vocal, I think even increasingly vocal about his support for like life extension and generally interest in supporting longevity, supporting Aubrey de Grey, and he's got, I think in his Twitter bio, he's got this fable of the dragon, which is sort of like an aging metaphor and something like that. So these people speaking up, to your point, like a lot of people still, it's too early and too controversial to talk about. But people like Vitalik and others who are starting to talk about it more publicly, I think it's going to help with attention, and with attention sort of comes some more funding, hopefully, and some more, governments maybe considering things a little bit differently. So I'm sort of optimistic about the way that things can go. How do you think crypto, you mentioned like there's a lot of overlap and interest, but crypto people, if things go the way that probably you and I are expecting them to, or think there's a high probability that they may, people are going to be very rich who sort of were in crypto early and are in crypto in a big way now. Do you sort of have hope for longevity that these sort of this new class of rich will sort of have different priorities than the current, and maybe turn some of their focus and money towards longevity?
Yeah, I certainly do, and I'm starting seeing a trend among the early crypto adopters to spend more time, generally with their health, but specifically on longevity. I mean, it's very natural, right? Like once you get rich, once you basically removed all these finance related stress in your life, what do you focus on next, right? like money, if you lose your money, you can always make it back. But if you lose your health, it's going to be harder. And so it's very natural for crypto people who have gotten rich or going to get rich to eventually focus on longevity. And I think there are two ways that crypto people can really help with the longevity field. And number one is obviously the funding. I think there's a huge mismatch between crypto and longevity when it comes to funding. Like crypto, there's way too much money, and in longevity, there's just not enough. Obviously, there's a chicken egg problem between between funding and human capital, right? Like if more human capital will lead to more funding, but also more funding will lead to more talent getting into this field. So I think funding will certainly help with the longevity field. I think a lot more crypto people will start investing. In fact, a lot of them have started, and a lot of them will do philanthropy, especially in longevity as well. So that's number one. The other thing is just the public perception, right? Like the fact that crypto has really taken off, and the world is really paying attention to crypto now means that crypto people have a lot bigger voice in this world. People are listening to crypto people. And what is missing in longevity, I think, is this public perception of this field. Most people still think it's a joke, or most people think it's unethical, or that humans as a society have more important priorities. I think it's really important to change this perception, and crypto people are equipped to do this. They have a big voice. They are they're heard by the rest of the world, and I think they can really help shaping this public perception of longevity. So I think these are two of the ways in which I can see a big increasing overlap between the two worlds in the near future.
Yeah, I certainly hope that's right. So we talked about, betting on longevity. I'd like to sort of bring that to more like tangible terms if we can, and hear how you might think about betting on longevity. Off the top of my head, like I would think, you can sort of bet with your money or bet with your time, and money might be like investing, or philanthropy, and time might be either like start trying to build something yourself, or get a career in longevity, or on the other side, just sort of spending your time doing longevity, like fasting, or using certain supplements, or experimenting individually. How do you think
Mhm.
about betting on longevity, given, like you said, it may be actually an infinite EV? Okay, so say you're really convinced on this, what do you actually go and do?
Um, I would say investing is very hard for people who are not in this field full time. For me personally, I spend maybe 10-20% of my time just reading about this field and health in general. But even with that kind of time commitment, I don't think I am really equipped to make sound judgments when it comes to like very very early stage startup. Even if I did have the deal flow, which I have some, but I don't think I have the expertise to make judgments or make sound investment decisions. So I generally just give my money to funds that are focused on longevity as a limited partner. I do also make a few investments, individual investments as a direct investor, but those are relatively rare. And I love to invest if I truly understand like whether the problem that they're solving and the solution. But generally speaking, I think for the average person, you might be better off trying to become a limited partner in a good fund. But again, due to some regulations that I don't necessarily agree with, for instance, like the accredited investor kind of regulations, I don't think that option is even accessible to the vast majority of people. I think for the vast majority of people, just take some time to learn about this field, And you will eventually realize that a lot of that just leads to general health. Like aging or longevity and health are really one and the same. You don't live longer by not living healthier, and vice versa. So what you will end up realizing is if you just do the stuff that your doctor or people generally say you should do, like exercise, like for instance, exercise at least 2 to 3 hours, ideally up to like 5 or 6 hours per week. Eat really healthy, eat whole foods, a lot of vegetables, and also when it comes to diet, there's a lot of debates around certain things, but there are a few things that there's almost no debate, right? Like eating a lot of vegetables, nuts, seeds, fruits to some extent. If you do that kind of stuff, also meditate, sleep well, reduce stress, take vitamin D, that kind of stuff, you will do really well when it comes to health span and lifespan. And if you really want to take it to the next level, maybe learn about some of the supplements. Personally, I don't take that many stuff. I only take vitamin D. There's a lot of evidence for vitamin D for general health and longevity. I don't take that many, anything else at the moment. I don't. I mean, like when it comes to supplements, there's the evidence is usually not that strong enough. I mean, it's at the end of the day, it's always a matter of risk reward. If you think the reward of living a few years longer is worth the risk of not knowing the potential short-term and long-term side effects, then you could potentially take a risk there and use some of these supplements. But for now, I'm not old enough to really take the risks yet, and I'm still learning. I'm still gathering evidence. So I guess my advice for the average person is start with the basics, right? Like the basics that I just mentioned, and you will go a long way. Like that should account for like maybe 80% of longevity. And then if you feel like it, learn about the more hardcore stuff as well.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. You ask a lot of people, experts in the space, what their regimen is, and the blanket response to me seems to be something like, I can give this advice and that advice on like the traditional things of, diet and maybe some people talk about fasting, but also just like exercise and sleep and things. And so sort of the most common answer I've heard is like, hey, we're just not there yet to have like these really sophisticated regimens and responses, but sort of everything that we're working on is hopeful to sort of get there in the decade or two or however many ahead. But
Yep.
for now, there's sort of these well-known things that you can do to be healthy, and that's sort of all there is. And going too deep and trying too many supplements at a certain point might be sort of counterproductive. But at the very least, there's a few things that are known that are hard enough to do: is get enough sleep and eat well and things like this. And then maybe, at least the way I think of it, is like it's sort of um, I think we're at this very unique and interesting point in time, unique in all of history, where like it's not unreasonable to, maybe it's a 1% chance or a 0.1% chance or a 50% chance, who knows what it is, but there is some probability, it seems, that we can start meaningfully extending health span and lifespan within our lifetimes. And so you want to sort of prolong your life by whatever means we have to, long enough to see that within your lifetime. How do you think about like longevity, escape velocity, and do you think similarly that there's a chance that we could get there? And I know you're not an expert, but like, does this sort of factor into, um, more on like the personal level? Does this factor into like sort of how you live your life at all now that you're sort of deep into the longevity stuff?
100%. I think the probability at number one is not zero. So anything above zero, any probability above zero times the potential reward of being infinite still gives you an EV of infinity, right? So it's certainly
Interesting.
worth. It's certainly worth. I mean, it's certainly at least subconsciously drives my day-to-day decisions when it comes to like eating, sleeping, especially stress reduction. Um, I think for me that's the hardest part. For a lot of people, that's also like stress reduction is such a like everything else, like eating, sleeping, exercise, you can force yourself to do those things. But when it comes to like anything that's mind related, like stress, anxiety, these things, it's very hard. Once you get into it, it's very hard to get out because you need your own mind to treat your mind, right? So like it's very hard to heal yourself or protect yourself when it comes to mind related health issues. But anyway, the reason why I'm saying that is like all these things are, this idea of longevity, escape velocity does at least at the back of my mind drives my day-to-day decisions.
So it sounds like, correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like you've spent some time sort of intentionally thinking about stress reduction. Do you have any strategies that like you can share? You mentioned meditation briefly earlier, but is this a problem that you consider yourself having like identified and to some extent solved or for yourself, or something you're still sort of thinking about and exploring?
Yeah, uh, you know, I come from a very high stress kind of work environment in trading. I've always thought of myself as somebody who's very stress resistant, but it turns out that um, most of the time, uh, I guess I can't speak for everybody, but for myself, I just realized like, I'm just suppressed. I'm just suppressing my own kind of negative um, thoughts and emotions, when, like for instance, anger, anxiety, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't realize I'm stressful or anxious until I start feeling some physical discomfort. And after I go through like get a bunch of checks and I realize there's nothing that's mechanically wrong with my body. And after you rule all those things out, it turns out that it's really the mind. So I think the number one thing that I I try to do at least is to realize I have some of these problems when it comes to the mind and when it comes to anxiety and stress and stuff like that. And it turns out that, there are many schools of meditation, for instance, but it seems like most of them, they all talk about, recognizing and realizing that you have certain discomfort or pain in your body or in your mind. Like every meditation course I've done, they always talk about that. They always talk about realizing and recognizing your own problems. And I think that's a great first step. And sometimes the fact of trying to recognize those problems itself will heal the problems, the physical problems or the physical symptoms that you're having. So I try to meditate. I think it's really helpful. Um, you want to do that consistently, even if you don't feel anything discomfort, even if you don't feel any pain or anything like that, because the benefit compounds over time. It may also have a preventative kind of effect as well. Sleep definitely reduces stress. There's something that people don't talk about in general. It's so underappreciated. It's to spend time building relationships, close relationships. Not like having 100 friends or having 100,000 followers on Twitter, but really building close relationships with friends, spending time with the family. I think that's really important. I don't know the underlying. I mean, I have some ideas to the underlying, I guess, medical or biological processes, but it does seem to reduce cortisol and stuff like that. If you spend quality time with friends and family, that's really, really underappreciated. Um, so there's that, and I mean, even eating healthy, probably like the stress is such a like stress can just cause a bunch of problems throughout the body. Like it's there's probably quite a few hormones that are related to stress that will potentially cause physical symptoms, and I think it's really important to make sure that you're not super stressed out or anxious, and do everything you can to reduce stress and anxiety, I think.
Yeah, it's really interesting. As you're talking about all of this, I'm just like sort of mouth open about like the sort of similarities between what you're talking about and myself. Like this gets somewhat personal, but similarly to what you said, like I've always, from school through starting work and everything, been in like a relatively high stress sort of environment, and a lot of people sort of working hard to excel in whatever they're doing, and like myself included. But like you, I always sort of, even to this day, like I just don't think of myself as like a high stress person. Like people like people not complain, but people say like I'm anxious or like I'm dealing with like anxiety, and like I never really, I guess once in a while maybe I might feel anxious or something, but it's just something that genuinely I just don't feel like I deal with. But to your point on actually having sort of physical flare-ups, um, I've had like, some basically like I've had chronic back pain for like the last few years or so. And it sort of goes up and down, here and there. But
Hey, just very quickly, on that note, I don't know if you read the book.
Sarno.
There's yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I was reading that this morning. Um, so I'm actually gonna try that. I don't have a chronic back pain, but some of my family does. So yeah, I think that might be something that your audience might be interested in. It seems that chronic back pain is such a epidemic in, at least in developed world, where stress is super high, and the chronic back pain is actually a symptom of that.
Yeah, it's funny. I just you were reading it this morning. I just finished it probably 2 weeks ago. My friend from who I met on Twitter, Mehdi, had recommended it to me. He's actually really into longevity as well, and working on a cool company called Vital Health. I think it's vitalhealth.com. So you can go check that out if you're listening. But he
I'm
rec
actually an investor,
oh, you
so
are?
I
Okay.
know. Yeah.
Okay, so I guess a lot of things are connecting here, but yeah, that book, for better or worse, sort of made me realize that like even though like I've actually spent time like meditating. I think of myself as someone who's it's never really been something like I enjoy running more than meditating. It seems to do more for me in terms of like mental health, and just like it's a nice way for me to like come back to earth, and I come out of a run with like some really clear thoughts, where meditating maybe a little bit does that, but it's never really like clicked for me. But that book was the first thing that made me realize like, okay, somehow, and maybe it's just, maybe I'll be over this in a few months or whatever, but maybe I like somewhere down in the subconscious or whatever am actually feeling stressed. And it's just, I don't know. I think there's like a very interesting question there, which is something along the lines of like, if you genuinely don't feel stressed or anxious or whatever, like, is it, is that, but it's like somewhere deep in the subconscious, like, do you need to go and get it, if that makes sense? Like, I don't know. It's been something that I've just been thinking about lately. Um, where like I try to be really honest with myself, and I don't want to like trick myself into thinking I'm stressed if I'm not, so it's like sort of this careful balance that I've been working on. But it's interesting, a lot of threads connecting there, it sounds like.
Yeah, it seems like the body has the body and the mind are a pressure valve. If you try to suppress your mental negative emotions, it'll come out somewhere else in your body, which in this case is the chronic back pain. And the book that we just talked about, you mentioned that sometimes when people's back pain go away, they get some other problem. They get some problem in their stomach ulcer and stuff like that. And when the
Mhm.
ulcer goes away, they get a problem somewhere else. So there's like the pressure will always go out somewhere in your body if you continue to suppress some of the anxious or other kind of negative emotions.
Yeah, so we'll see. It's a TBD for me. I try to be a very positive person. I think I generally am a very positive person. And so I don't know if sort of being that way is sort of serving against me in some capacity, and I'm sort of like suppressing negative stuff, and it's showing up in my back. And like I said, it goes sort of up and down in these sort of unpredictable, hard to hard to sort of relate to a cause way, but certainly an interesting thing for people to think about it. And yeah, go read the book if this sounds interesting, I guess. I feel a little bit remiss that we haven't talked about crypto at all, and we're coming up on the end of the hour. So maybe we can just do a very high level sort of overview on your current perspective, and then maybe do a to be continued on the conversation. But maybe a good prompt, I think, would be you've mentioned that I think it's like 1998 in crypto. I think drawing upon like the analogy for the internet. Where do you think we are now? What do you expect for whatever time frame you want to talk about to come? And sort of what are you excited about? What risks do you see? Just like the overall sort of impression of where things stand.
Yeah, well, there's certainly some similarities between now and 1998, and there's some differences. It's not a perfect analogy. I would say when it comes to kind of consumer kind of usage of crypto, I don't think crypto is actually as big as the internet was in 1998. I think we're still a lot earlier than 1998 in crypto in general. But when it comes to funding and excitement and hype and all that stuff, we're certainly near that kind of period. If we drill down into the different sectors in crypto, obviously Bitcoin, most people in the macro world, those macro traders are looking at Bitcoin as digital gold. So the digital gold narrative that the Bitcoiners used to talk about on Bitcoin Talk has become a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it's working. But obviously, it'll probably take years, maybe even decades, for Bitcoin to really overtake gold as the dominant kind of store value, inflation hedge, potentially a geopolitical hedge as well. So that will take a while, but we have gone very far so far with Bitcoin. DeFi is still being used as sort of a toy for the wealthy, especially the crypto wealthy. But so is virtually every technology that the average person uses today began as some sort of playground, some sort of toy, be it computer or smartphone or anything that you use today started as being something expensive to use, and that the wealthy could afford. But so I'm very bullish on DeFi. But again, it's a generation-long kind of effort. When it comes to NFTs, digital art, digital collectibles, I would argue that this sector has gone even further than DeFi when it comes to the social impact, when it comes to mainstream adoption. Maybe because it's easier to use, it's more intuitive. Like in DeFi, you still have to kind of install wallets and then do all this yield farming and there's MetaMask, Uniswap, Aave, like all these things. It's not, the user experience is very different from like using a traditional financial product. But with digital art, NFTs, especially with NBA Top Shot, for instance, a lot of these products have kind of abstracted the crypto native user experience away from the average user. And it's also a lot easier to understand. It's just, it's gaming items, collectibles, that kind of stuff. So in terms of the number of users, it does seem to me that NFTs have gone even further than DeFi. But I still think that DeFi might be a much bigger vertical. Just looking at traditional finance, like the financial sector is a $10 trillion sector. You probably can't say the same about gaming and collectibles and so on. But again, it's a very interesting, it really brings, this sector really brings crypto to the masses. the one sector that hasn't taken off at all so far, but something I'm really excited about over the coming years is decentralized social media. It's something that I didn't think we needed 3 years ago, but maybe starting about a year ago with all that censorship around Trump and this sort of very liberal kind of leaning on Twitter, and then the emergence of Republican lean or right-leaning kind of social media like Parler, right? We've seen kind of number one, a lot of social media-based censorship. The president of the United States is not even the most powerful man in the country. It's the CEO of those massive social media companies. And number two, every social media platform has some kind of tribalism, and and as a result, a little bit of community-driven censorship as well that drifts other groups of people away from the platform. So I think crypto-based social media is a natural solution for this. It's a solution where no one can unilaterally censor anybody else. No one can really change the monetization rules at the expense of the users, something we've seen with YouTube, for instance. And the platform cannot easily deplatform the developers building on top of it. So some of these problems can be naturally solved by crypto, at least in theory. The reason why I'm saying in theory is I think the tech isn't there yet. Even the most scalable platform or blockchain right now, let's say like Solana, for instance, sorry, can't really handle the kind of transaction per second that social media are handling right now. So I think this might take a few more years to take off, but I'm really excited for that.
Yeah, well, that is a fascinating overview, and I'm sure we could spend another hour digging into decentralized social media and DeFi, and certainly talk more about what you're doing now with DeFi Alliance. I would highly encourage anyone who's listening, who's working in DeFi, to check it out, or more importantly, I guess if you're not yet working in DeFi but have an idea for a project that you want to get started on, I think DeFi Alliance would be a great place to get started. But Qiao, I want to thank you again for taking the time and joining me on the show today. It's been an awesome conversation, and I'm sure we could have gone a lot longer, but appreciate your time and want to be respectful of it. Where can people go to follow you and what you're working on from here on forward?
Yeah, for DeFi Alliance, feel free to check out our new website, which will be rolled out in a couple months, defialliance.co. And if you're a startup, feel free to apply there to our accelerator program. And for myself, you can find me generally on Twitter, QWQIAO is my initials, that's my first name.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thanks, Jake. Take care.